What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Celtics Collective, brought to you by Heavy on Sports. I'm your host, Adam Taylor, and I'm joined by our resident insider, Mr. NBA himself, Mr. Sean Devaney. What's going on, Sean?
Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing well. The Celtics are undefeated as we record this, so I'm doing well. Before we get into the actual discussion of the start of the season, I do want to give everybody a rundown of what they can expect. So this first segment is going to be myself and Sean talking about Jayson Tatum at the start of the year, why he's unquestionably the best player on the planet. Obviously, there's no bias there. Then we're going to look at, what the rest of the team, what other players have been balling out, anyone that can improve, areas the Celtics can improve. We're going to take a look over to the Western Conference to look at one team that's just had a terrible start to the season and it fills us with joy. And then we're going to look at the Eastern Conference again for another team that's had a really bad start to the season, which fills us with joy. In the second half of the show, we're going to be joined by former Boston Celtic Chris Herren, where we discuss a bunch of stuff from playing at Durfee, his recruitment phase, and then choosing to play at Boston College, the addiction battles that he faced, both as a non-professional during his younger years at college and then moving into the NBA, his interactions with Chris Mullin, both before the NBA, early NBA, and then after leaving the NBA, his happiest times in the league, both with the Denver Nuggets and Boston Celtics, obviously for very different reasons. And then what he's doing now and how he's trying to give back to the community. It was a really fun interview though, right, Sean? Like I found that because it was so different to most other basketball interviews that it kind of hit home, and it was a real good topic that we hope that can help people.
Yeah, it definitely went beyond basketball. And anybody who is familiar with Chris's story knows what he went through. I mean, he was in the class of 1994. He was the best player in all of the land. Like he was the guy. Winds up going to BC and had set some records in Massachusetts in terms of scoring and winning, and he was just such a great player. And then to see him deal with that as he's dealing with addiction. Another thing we talked about too was Lenny Bias, 1986 number 3 pick for the Celtics. Who probably would have been, just judging who you talk to, as close to Michael Jordan as it could have come. And he died of cocaine use, and that was very much in Chris's head. So just a great interview, and just an interesting guy to talk to in terms of what he's been through and where he is now.
Yeah, I found the interview really educational. I did like growing up out here. I didn't really know much of Chris Herren. The interview, actually, I've looked for it since. It's not something I can load up like a Netflix and find, and we don't really have the 30 for 30s out here unless they're big time. So it was awesome to kind of hear a story that and then see how that's affected his life positively, and then how now he's trying to give back to people in the Boston community and then throughout the country as well. So no, it was a really great interview. If you've still stuck around, that means you haven't skipped ahead. So you actually want to know what me and Sean have to say right now. We thank you for that. But if you want to skip ahead and come backwards afterwards, we don't blame you either. I mean, I hold no grudges held here.
No, absolutely.
But let's dive into the stuff we want to hit on. So obviously, Jayson Tatum is numero uno on the docket. He's just been electric since the start of the season. He usually, for a guy that comes out so slow and really clunky, usually at the start of the season, he's still figuring out his distance, still figuring out his shot release, his timing, and all of that stuff. Everything's just been money. He's been draining buckets left, right, and center, 3 points, 2 points at the rim, in the mid-range, from the post, off the drive. And a large part of that, in my opinion, has been the added tempo that Boston are playing at. Seems to really help these guys settle into a rhythm early, and then they tend to flourish because of that tempo and because of the spacing and everything else that it provides. But man, Tatum was named Player of the Week about 15 minutes before we started recording this as well. Is there an MVP case? I mean, we're 3 games into the season at the time of recording. I think it's far too early, but that's definitely a conversation that I've seen floating around. So let's get Sean's opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was ridiculous to talk about Jayson Tatum as MVP before the season started. I mean, here he is. He's averaging 35 points and leading the league in scoring. before, 3 games in. Obviously, we've got a long way to go, understandably, but he's showing everything he can do on the offensive side of the ball, and I think that aggressiveness is welcome. I think that he's been a beneficiary of the pace that the Celtics have played at. And that's what you want to see. I mean, you want to put your best guys in their best positions to do what they do. And I think that Joe Mazzulla, that's a credit to him, because this is clearly a different style of play. I think Ime Udoka wanted them to play faster, but he also wanted them to focus so much on defense that they didn't play as fast as they could. I think they are playing much faster. I think they're moving the ball much more. We're not seeing those dead spots where, the ball kind of dies and it winds up in Jaylen or Jayson's hands and it doesn't move. We're seeing the ball move so much more, and I think that that's keeping defenses on their heels a little bit. I think the other thing, Adam, to think about is that I don't think Jayson Tatum has ever played better defensively. I think that's the other thing, is that he is right now the best offensive player in the league. 3 games, understood, but he's also one of the best defensive players in the league. I mean, he's averaging 1.7 blocks right now. He is averaging 8.3 rebounds. He is doing everything on the defensive end as well. So yeah, he's got a pretty strong case through 1 week. Understandably, a short period of time, but right now you gotta think about him when we're making early season MVP cases.
See, the one thing I want to say there is what you touched on with the defense is interesting, right? Because Tatum's defense as an individual, as a point of attack guy, as a off-ball defensive player, has been exceptional, as you said, to start the season. However, Boston have certainly allowed their defense to slip in favor of that offense, right? And I think that at the moment we're leaning too far one way. We're leaning too far into the offense, and the defense is, fair enough. You're still winning games, but Tatum said it after the Magic game when he was speaking with Abby Chin, was like, hey, we let up 100 points, 100 plus points on opening night. We let up 120 points in this game. That's not who we are as a team. It's not what got us success last season. Finding that balance, that middle ground where the offense is still fluid enough that you don't get those dead spots, but the defense is still stringent enough that teams come in thinking, how are we even going to crack 100 tonight? Finding that balance is going to be the biggest task on Joe Mazzulla's kind of in tray. His inbox right now, the pinned task on that inbox is find some balance.
Yeah, but I like what he's doing, though. I like the fact that the emphasis has been on the offense, because look, this is the same team defensively as it was last year, especially once Rob Williams gets back. And it's going to probably be a better team defensively because you've got Malcolm Brogdon out there, who's a very good defender on the perimeter. They're going to get back to where they were defensively, and even right now. So right now they're averaging 113.6 points per game per 40 minutes per 100 possessions, and that's 9th in the NBA, which is not great compared to where they were last year. They were 1st, but that's not bad. You're 9th. I mean, that's out of 30 teams, you're still 9th. So through 3 games. The defense hasn't been great, but I'm not that worried about that. I like what I see offensively, and I think they're going to tighten up as things go forward defensively.
Yeah, so I've said this on many a podcast episode with you that, there's no point being a top 5 offense and a bottom 5 defense, or a top 5 defense and a bottom 10 offense. You need that balance, right? And you don't need to be the number 1 defense in the league. You just need to be a top 7 defense in the league, top 8, and then be a top 8 offense. And all of a sudden you have so much more balance than 95% of the NBA. You're one of the most complete teams around. You don't need to be number 1 on both categories. Now, the Warriors last season did spend a considerable amount of time ranked 1st in both, and they won a championship, but that's the Warriors. And the league was going through a whole bunch of issues, people picking up COVID. There was a bunch of 10 days getting thrown around there and hardship exemptions. So I try not to put too much stock in like the point differential and the net rating metrics from last season, because if you look at that without remembering all of those things that went on for a large portion of the season, then those numbers don't tell the whole story, right? So I'm inclined to agree. I do think that once Robert Williams comes back, that defense naturally takes a step, because you have such an elite rim protector there and an elite shot deterrent where he's just around the rim, so you don't even want to venture into that area. I think once Rob comes back, it naturally improves. But the offense has been fantastic. I mean, if anybody follows me on socials, you've seen I've been posting a bunch of stuff that how Mazzulla's been doing it differently to Udoka. Not that Udoka was bad. It's just different, right? And it's not just Tatum that's benefited. Jaylen Brown, other than that Magic game where I think he was forcing the issue a little bit down the stretch, I do feel like a lot of those shots were forced in the second half. But other than that, Jaylen Brown's been excellent too. He's been a man on a mission.
Yeah, and I think we saw that even in the preseason, that going back to the trade rumors and all that, that he really wanted to make a case for how good he is, and he probably would have done that but he's been fantastic defensively as well. So he's averaging 25 points, he's averaging 5.5 rebounds or so, but he's also averaging about a steal and a half and about a block and a half a game. I mean, he has been on both sides of the ball, really getting after it. I think when you always hear this, and Greg Popovich used to tell a story about how in the first day of training camp, what he would do, no matter who was there, he would yell at Tim Duncan. He would find something that Tim Duncan wasn't doing, he would yell at him, because he knew that if you see the coach yelling at the star player and the star player takes it, then everybody else has to take it. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that with the Celtics, where you've got Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown really putting themselves out there. They want to win this year. They are really putting it out there. And if the star players are doing that, then everybody else in the roles after that are going to be doing that as well.
And I think that when you look around, and that's a really great point with Tim. I miss Tim Duncan. Don't you miss Tim Duncan?
Yeah, I do. I
miss Tim Duncan. But it's a great point, and other players in the team have started stepping up, and everybody seems to be holding each other accountable. Derek White had a huge night against Orlando. Yeah. I think it's interesting that just heading into the season, we saw the report that Derek White had been working with Ben Sullivan on fixing that shot, right? Because Ben Sullivan came into Boston at the start of last season with a reputation as like this shot fixer. He came from Milwaukee. He'd been working with Giannis, helping Giannis develop that 3-point shot, helping him develop that mid-range. And obviously Giannis is now quite a reasonable shooter. And he's come in, he's worked with Derek White over the offseason, and suddenly Derek White is now Ray Allen. Like somewhere has just changed. But it's
through 3 games, we're ready to call Derek White Ray Allen.
Well, I mean, we're calling Tatum MVP after 3 games. I mean, one's more true than the other, but if we're making outrageous statements, we're making outrageous statements. I mean, but no, like Derek White is a knockdown 3-point shooter at this point of the season. In 3 games, he's hit more threes on his own than probably. I haven't looked at this, but he's most likely hit more threes on his own than the Lakers have as an entire unit.
The Lakers are right now when you have your team leader going into a press conference and saying, we can't throw a penny into the ocean through 3 games, holy cow. And honestly, Adam, I look at this team and this Lakers team, and I just wonder, like, does LeBron care right now? It doesn't seem like, and just watching the body language between him and Anthony Davis, and just, I don't see a lot of care factor on that team. And I don't know. This seems like an absolute disaster in the making.
So late in the first quarter or early in the second, I can't remember which one it is, LeBron gets the ball almost at the halfway line. There's 12 seconds left on the shot clock, and he jacks it from nearly half court and he airballs. And at that moment in time, I was like, he don't care.
He don't care, right?
How can you?
No, right. And I've been talking to people around the league about, where do they stand and all that stuff, and Westbrook and if you talk to people in the league, like, nobody thinks that Westbrook is that much of the problem as like everybody else thinks. It's more like LeBron and Anthony Davis. Like, you've got to care about this. Like, you've got to care. And you know, Patrick Beverley as a mostly you know, off the bench cheerleader, or you know, just limited minutes cheerleader, he can only do so much. You need LeBron and you need Anthony Davis to care, and I'm not sure they do at this point.
No, and they're very happy. Like Stephen A said today, which I found quite interesting. Stephen A was like, LeBron, you said you didn't want to talk about Westbrook. You didn't want to be drawn in on those conversations, but you were the dude that sat there on opening night saying, this team doesn't have shooting. We don't. And you knew who everybody was going to look at when you said that. You understood the narrative that you were feeding into.
Mm-hmm.
So but now you're like, so I understand what LeBron was saying, like, hey, you're not going to get a direct quote from me. But at the same time, you made your feelings clear on game one. You said it again in game three. We can't throw a penny in the ocean. Now, obviously, I think that there's a point where you're pressuring the front office to make a move. LeBron wants to win another ring. We're all aware of that. I don't think Davis is as locked in as he was before he won his first championship. I don't think he's been the same dude since then. And Westbrook, to me, if the ball's not in his hands, and people have said this for nearly a decade, if the ball's not in Russ's hands, Russ might as well not be on the floor.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. And the irony of all this, Adam, is that the team that is best positioned to make a trade for Russell Westbrook and send the Lakers some players is 3-0, and that's the Utah Jazz, right? I mean, like that is the team that, you know, once the Buddy Hield and Miles Turner stuff broke down, as it did during the summer, between the Lakers and the Indiana Pacers, then it was the Jazz that seemed to be the team, you know, most in position to make a deal for Russell Westbrook, and they've been talking on and off pretty much since July, and yet nothing's gotten done. But we could see all that come back again. And I just wonder, you know, I mean, maybe the Lakers just finally throw in their cards and say, you know, we'll give you our 2 picks. They've got the 2 picks, 27 and 29. They give them those 2 picks. They give them Russell Westbrook, and they get, you know, Mike Conley and Rudy Gay and, you know, a collection of players to see if that can help their roster.
I don't understand where any other deals could come from. Like, it makes sense for Utah. They're winning and they want to lose. Let's get rid of some of the players that are helping us win. We can buy Westbrook out or we can bench him. But if we want to keep losing, fine. Indiana want to lose, so it makes sense for them to move on from Turner and Hield. But the other team that's been kind of floated as like, hey, the Lakers have a huge interest in their point guard, their shooting guard, their combo guard, is the Charlotte Hornets. We want sorry, that someone text me. We want Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward, and in return, we're going to give you some draft picks and a Russell Westbrook. Well, that doesn't really work for Charlotte because they've just been through their rebuilding phase. Are they willing to re-enter a rebuilding phase? Because they're not going to play Westbrook when LaMelo's back.
Yeah, they're in a tough position because they've look. I mean, they're on the clock for LaMelo, right? I mean, they've got to re-sign him. They got to have him for an extension and all that stuff. If they go through a rebuilding point here in his 3rd season, that's not going to send a great message, and they know that. At the same time, they know what's happening with Miles Bridges. They know what's happening with James Bouknight. They know that they've got these players that are in serious trouble that they've invested a lot in. So it makes a lot of sense for them to reboot here and to send away Gordon Hayward, who hasn't been able to stay healthy and is 32, and send away Terry Rozier. So that makes a lot of sense. On the Charlotte Hornets part, it's just what message does that send to LaMelo is that, you know, 3 years in, we're still juggling these balls, and you know, it's a tough situation. I think that they, from what I understand, they want to rebuild. Like, they want to, you know, send away what they've got. And start bringing in some picks and thinking about the future. but they are worried about, we've got this star player. What's that gonna do for our future with him?
The first thing you need to think of there is the fact that Beasley's now pretty much gone. You don't know what's happening there. So you need to be able to sell LaMelo on the fact that, hey, your potential all-star running mate is no longer with this team. We don't think he's going to be coming back. Hayward hasn't worked out. Rozier, he needs the ball a bit too much to be able to play alongside you effectively. We're going to need to rebuild. And if you can, we want to rebuild around you. We want you to be the star. And to do that, we need to make this trade. There is a world where you can sell LaMelo on that and like make sure that he understands that you're rebuilding to accentuate him, because he came in. Was it the same year that Hayward came in or the year after? It was around
the same year. Yeah.
Yeah. So like he's never had a team built around him. He got slotted into the team that was already there. You know what I mean? So now, like he just basically replaced Kemba. So now this is where you could sell him on being that star and being built around and having a team that really works around him. But he's going to have to eat 2 or 3 bad years to do that. And you just don't know how stars are going to be willing to take that.
Right. Especially, his extension year is going to be, after next season. So, they're going to have to talk with him about that then. And yeah, it's tough. I mean, on the one hand, you know enough about the balls to know that, if the plan is we're going to do everything around you, maybe that'll work. But on the other hand, you're going to be asking them to play in a very small market for a team that's not going to be very good for at least 3-4 years. That's tough to do.
Yeah, it's really tough to do. But there is another team that's struggling at the moment who's still on the Eastern Coast, and they don't have a Russell Westbrook to trade. In fact, they don't really have any more moves to make in terms of rebuilding their roster, because they went all out during the offseason, brought in a PJ Tucker, a DeAnthony Melton, who I'm very high on as a player, a Daniel House. And it's still not working. And they're 0-3. And it's hilarious to me. But the Philadelphia 76ers are not the team that we all expected them to be starting the season. Again, 3 games in. Plenty of time to figure it out. But right now, it still just looks disjointed the same way it did the end to end last season.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with them is their bench. I mean, their bench has just been terrible throughout the time that Doc Rivers has been there, and that's not changed. They've got to be able to, go to their bench and have some guys that they can rely on. I think they thought they were doing that with Daniel House. I think they thought that bringing in some better starters would help out the bench. It just hasn't. They have a terrible, terrible bench, and they lose. Whatever they have building up with their starters, they lose it. They lose it when their bench comes in. I don't know that Tyrese Maxey and James Harden can coexist. Ultimately, I think Maxey is a guy who, man, you got to give that guy. He is so good. You got to give that guy the ball, but you can't do it while James Harden is there. And then of course you got to feed Joel Embiid as well. So I think there's just too many mouths to feed right now in Philadelphia. I think in the end we're going to see Doc Rivers, old Celtics friend, Doc Rivers. We're going to see him on the hot seat. I'm not sure he deserves it. I think it's just the way the roster is right now. I think you have to make some changes.
And I don't know what those changes would be. That's the problem.
Right.
That's the problem, right? Like James Harden against the Celtics dribbled the ball more times on his own than the entire the rest of his teammates put together. Yeah. And that's James Harden's style of play. You knew that when you acquired him because you've got over 10 years worth of sample size to understand this from. You know that Joel Embiid needs to have the ball either on the post or above the perimeter. He's not really going to be a guy you want to get ripping through the lane and feeding him. So now you're very much in a half-court based offense, and everybody just saying, do you know what? I feel like the Sixers are where the Celtics were 2-3 years ago. They've got the talent, but the movement isn't there off ball. The cohesion isn't there with the bench and all the stars. and it's just destined to it. It's just not going to work. Something's going to break down somewhere, and then they're going to have to tweak it again this summer, and then they might be ready next year. But I do feel like the Sixers are still at least 18 months away from being a contender.
Yeah, and I don't think Doc Rivers will be the coach when that happens.
No, it'll be me.
Of course.
It'll be me. No, jokes aside, there's a lot of good young coaches out there. All right, I think we've spoken enough about the rest of the NBA. We've definitely had a good discussion about Tatum and the Celtics as well. So we're going to leave you with Chris Herren. Now, obviously, we're there too. But for the second segment, it's going to be the interview with Chris Herren. Everybody enjoy. Make sure you hit that follow, that like, that subscribe, leave comments, do all that good stuff on the show. And then we'll be back with you again next week to discuss even more Celtics basketball. Okay, Chris, so we'll just jump straight into the questions. I know time is of the essence. So we'll just start with this. We'll start back in the beginning of your career. When did you first notice that you kind of had a different level of talent to everybody else around you?
You know, I think in grade school, I think elementary school, you know, I think I kind of hit my ceiling within a radius of my home. And I realized pretty quickly that I was the best within that, 50-mile radius. You know, but I was willing to continue to push that radius out. Right. And so I think initially, it was like when I realized it was probably at a very young age, probably 9-10 years old, that like anybody I compete against doesn't seem to have what I have.
And how long was it until you started getting national attention?
You know, I got national attention late. So probably my junior year, I kind of broke out onto the AAU circuit. We won a couple of national championships, a couple of huge games, and I started getting some recognition and started getting ranked. But it wasn't till late in my junior year that I started getting kind of talks about being a McDonald's All-American.
I grew up in Lynn around the same time that you were playing down in Fall River. Now, there's not a lot of Massachusetts, high-level prospects that came out. I remember when you went to BC, it was a big deal for BC. What was that decision like for you and sticking around there?
I think there were multiple variables, right? I think, my parents were going through a divorce. My dad's alcoholism caused that marriage to fail. And I wanted to stay close to my family. So that played a part. I wanted to stay close to Fall River. I was young, I was naive, I was immature. I wasn't ready for that next phase of my life, to be quite honest with you. And, when I look back, and if I could take my younger self and kind of move him around a little bit, I probably would have skipped BC, went into a prep school for a year, and then transitioned back down to Newton.
Yeah, and do you think, as you look back, do you think that would have changed things, or do you think that sort of what was always inside you was always going to be inside you?
Well, I think those early years are critical. I think those are extremely critical years. I think, not living on my own for the first time on BC's campus with a wild side to me. I think in hindsight, if my parents had the opportunity, they probably would have sent me to a prep school and let me, see how I adjusted with some oversight in a prep school on their campus, but a little bit more freedom.
So what happened at BC that sort of accentuated, I guess, that wild side?
Cocaine entered my world at BC. I was introduced to cocaine when I was 18 years old. And cocaine, it had this unbelievable power of allowing me to stay up and talk and communicate and be emotional and talk about all these things that I've been through. And, so I fell in love with that. Like a lot of people who've done, you know, people who've gone down that road can identify. You know, someone who's never gone down that road, they say that's crazy, you know, but people who have gone down that road, they know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, it's the late nights, it's the emotional, the raw conversations you have with people, the honesty that high kind of provokes, you know, is something that I kind of fell for, you know, at a very young age. Again, it's, you know, these are all things that I didn't have, right? I didn't have these tools. And, you know, being 18 years old and being immature and being on that campus, you know, I probably should have been in some type of therapy, you know, at a young age. But that kind of, that behavior kind of fast tracked me.
It's interesting that you bring up therapy, because I don't think that was, you know, it was still about 10 years after Len Bias. And so there was still this view of cocaine, especially among athletes, as, you know, just like it's something's wrong with you because you're doing it. BC was sort of punitive to you when you failed the drug test. You know, things have come a long way since then.
No, they have. I mean, listen, and I say this all the time. BC had their approach, and Fresno State had theirs. You know, and BC was punitive. Fresno State was more of a therapeutic approach, a supportive approach. You know, I wasn't the only athlete. You know what I mean? So there, I wasn't the only athlete on that campus. Never mind the only athlete. I mean, Len Bias, unfortunately. You know, I wish those tales deterred everybody from going down that road. You know, I think what people need to understand, and I talk about it today, anytime you do cocaine, especially with the fentanyl issue today, you're taking a chance of dying. You know, so every guy in a nightclub, every guy, woman in a bar that's pulling cocaine out of their pocket and running to the bathroom, you're taking a chance at ending your life. And I see it every day in the work I'm in. Yeah. Every single day I see or hear about someone going out on a Friday night and doing a little couple of lines of cocaine, and it was their last night. You know, and at a very young age, that wasn't the approach for me. Like Christopher, like you're 18, you know, you're jamming cocaine up your nose. You need help, dude. Like we need some help. You know, and you know what's wild to me is, you know, when people think about my story, they think about the Celtics, they think about the overdoses. Probably one of the loneliest days of my life was when I walked into that office on the campus of Boston College and they told me that I was no longer welcome. Because that walk back to my dorm room to pack up, there was no hiding from that. Like, I had a problem. I had a drug problem. And they punished me for it. And they tossed me off campus for it, which I totally understand. I'm not pointing the finger at BC. That was their approach. And to be quite honest with you, it's still that approach for some college, you know, communities and some college campuses. It's still very punitive.
When you went to Fresno and you said that was more of a supportive environment, did that help you kind of steer away from the cocaine issues, or was it still happening, but you just felt there was a bit more support? Maybe it wasn't as frequent of usage.
Yeah, there was less usage. You know, I built up more sober time, right? Like I was going to AA meetings, I was meeting with the therapist. So there was more therapeutic incentive to stay, you know, when I was introduced to this world of sobriety. Unfortunately, today, people, and especially back then, people look at sobriety like a punishment. Oh, I can never do this again. Like, no, you can never, you know, do cocaine again. That's okay. You know, like, thank God, you know, that you've come to that kind of crossroads in your life where you can't do that anymore. but it was looked upon as a punishment for me at that age, that I could never do, instead of kind of the narrative being like, you have this beautiful, life to live in recovery. You're just, you have an allergy to alcohol, to drugs, and but that's not the way it was laid out to me in 1994.
Is that how were you able to see it that way at all? With that you're an alcoholic first, and then the cocaine comes, or it's got to be tough at that age to kind of see that big picture.
Oh, of course, because everybody thinks, right, like they just want to. You just want to talk about the cocaine and the alcohol, not the self-esteem and the self-worth, not like the trauma that's buried under all of this. Right? It's like you need to stop doing cocaine. Okay, I get that, but I have a bunch of other stuff I need to unpack. And the alcohol was probably the toughest thing at 19, 20, 21 years old to end that relationship, right? And when you end that relationship, the chances of me doing cocaine if I wasn't drinking were nil. I just wasn't. It just, and people will take this statement how they want to take it. But for me, that's, it's peanut butter and jelly. They just go together. It's Oreos and milk, that it has to be for me. And that's why I had to come to the realization that not only can I not do cocaine, but I can't drink alcohol.
You move into the NBA, and obviously everything kind of opens up for you, right? There's a whole new world, there's a whole new presence, money's coming in, and you're over with Denver. How did you balanced the basketball and the drugs during college? How was that balance first moving into the NBA? Was you sustaining it?
I was sustaining it. I was, again, it was like, it was important, right? It meant something. I had teammates that wanted recovery for me, that knew that I belonged in sobriety. My experience in Denver was phenomenal. It was an older team. It was a bunch of veterans, McDice, Popeye Jones, Bryant Stith, Chauncey Billups, Nick Van Exel. I had veterans on the team that really kind of embraced my struggle and wanted to see me come out the other side. And that's why Denver, was probably one of the funnest, happiest, lightest years of my basketball career.
And just to go back just before the draft, you'd gotten to know Chris Mullin, right? And I just wonder how that relationship came to be.
So, some people say Jerry West, some people say Steve Nash, right? I mean, it was one of the two. I've heard a couple of different versions. Mully doesn't really remember. I think it might have been Steve Nash. I think that's what we kind of figured out. Wanted Mully to mentor me because he was familiar with recovery.
Right.
And as soon as I got done at Fresno State, I moved to Indiana and I moved in with Mully. And I started training for the draft. But then shortly after, my wife gave birth to our son. So I was only in Indiana for about 7-8 days training. And then I jumped ship and I went down back to Fall River where my wife, where we were starting our family, where my son was born.
Heading back over to the NBA, so you have this year that you've just described as probably one of your more like you that's the one you look back on with the most enjoyment, or one of those. And then all of a sudden you get traded to Boston. How did you react to that? Did that throw any kind of issues into the sobriety aspect going back home?
No, because it was in between seasons, right? I was introduced to OxyContin at the tail end of my Denver Nuggets career, my Denver Nuggets season. Far from a career. I kind of took that problem with me into the Celtics. And I knew when I got traded that this was a nightmare beginning. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to manage my addiction, my alcoholism myself, being in Boston.
You were, as I've heard, you were doing a lot of OxyContin at your peak.
Yeah, I mean, I was 1,600 milligrams a day. Spending around 25,000 a month on OxyContin. I mean, and it's that was playing for the Celtics.
Typically you do, if you were in pain, whatever, it'd be 50, 100 milligrams, something in that range.
Yeah, I mean, no, I would think it probably, if people come out of surgery, they're usually given like 10, 15 milligrams of OxyContin.
And you're doing 1,600.
Yeah. 800 in the morning, 800 at night.
Wow.
And that's not to get high. That's to hide it, to keep the secret.
What was the support systems like? Obviously, you say Fresno was a really supportive. Back then, I'm assuming it's different now. But what was it like with the NBA teams? Were they aware of this, or was you genuinely trying to hide everything from them?
No, they were aware. They were aware when I came into the NBA that I had a history. They put me in. I was working with a guy in Denver, Dr. Backus, who headed up the substance use program in the NBA, connected me with a person in Denver. That kind of got lost in the shuffle when I moved back to Boston. And I don't say this, I say it with, it just in 2000 and 2001, substance use wasn't looked at the way it's looked at today.
Right.
In 2000, 2001, you had this moral characteristic, you had bad character. It wasn't looked at as how we look at it today. And I think today they would deal with me a lot differently than they did in 1999 or 2000 and 2001.
I think about that, and I wonder, especially in the sports world, the way that it's viewed, to where you're not seen as a bad person, but as a sick person. You were at the forefront. Do you take some pride knowing that you had something to do with changing that, certainly among sports fans, and that you had something to do with showing people that, look, I was this level athlete, and this happened to me, not because I'm bad, but because I was sick?
Oh, I take great pride in that. Right. So does my family. My wife and I, we released this 30 for 30 11 years ago. And not knowing then the impact that we would have. But, the fact that over the last decade or so, we've, with the help of many, kind of chipped away at the stigma that's attached to this illness. And if you look at college sports today, if you, again, I'm referring back to 1994, but I probably wouldn't be kicked out of BC if I had the same problem I had back then, because my first 3 drug tests, I tested positive for marijuana. The last one had cocaine in my system. So if I was a college athlete today playing at Boston College or any other school, I probably wouldn't have been kicked out. And that was, 20 years ago.
The journey that you're now 14 years sober, is that right?
Correct.
That journey and deciding that, you could get the most out of it, not only to help other people, but I assume it helps you as well to tell your story. How did you kind of get onto that road and get that started?
It was a total accident. It wasn't intentional. I do about 250 speaking events a year. I tell people all the time I played in 82 games. I thought that was a lot. But 250 speaking events a year is quite a bit. And it all started with a woman who invited me to her classroom. There was an article that Mark Spears wrote in the Boston Globe when he saw me at a Celtics game with my son. And he wrote the article, and it talked about, my history and what I'd gone through, but also that I had recently lost my license because of my substance use and because of driving under the influence. But a teacher read that article, and her high school was within 10 miles of my house. And she said, I really want you to come speak to my health class. And she said, I know you can't drive. I'll pick you up, and I don't have any money, but I'll buy you Dunkin' Donuts. And that was the launch into my speaking career.
Wow.
Yeah, I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about speaking. I had no intentions. I mean, what people don't understand too is Unguarded wasn't supposed to be Unguarded. Unguarded was Jonathan Hawk and his crew were following me in a basketball gym. So my 30 for 30 originally was going to be about me kind of rebuilding my life with kids, teaching them how to play basketball, spending countless hours with them in the gym, building their self-esteem, which I was super proud of. But then at the end, Jonathan Hawk traveled with me to a speaking event. And Jonathan Hawk said, wait a second, like, we have to pivot. Like, this is the documentary. The documentary is going to be in your voice, telling your story in front of these people. So the documentary changed pretty quickly, and it was an adjustment for me and my wife because, we didn't have a lot of time to say, like, okay, we're okay with this. We're okay with putting our whole, family out there and our story and our pain. But, that's how kind of Unguarded, unfolded. And so there was never an intention to be this advocate, this public speaker on drug addiction. It just literally happened organically. And I'm extremely grateful for that. Public speaking is, you can market yourself as much as you want, but it's a word of mouth business. Like, people don't hire you unless somebody told them, he or she is good at what they do. When I signed on to a speakers bureau 10 years ago, and they told me that my career would probably be about a year and a half. Like, Unguarded would fade away, the book will go away, and then there'll be no more speaking events. And, here we are 11 years later.
Yeah. And just I'm sorry, go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, Sean, it's my fault, man. What's it like when you're doing these speaking events, and how everybody kind of knows you now? It's very public, right? You're very open about the struggles you went through, whereas a lot of people going through addiction, it's always an anonymous type of Alcoholics Anonymous and what. So how do you handle and how do you deal with just being so open? And do you ever worry about being labeled a certain way? Or
yeah, I mean, I think I'm not worried about labels. I think I'm labeled regardless, right? People are going to make they're going to have their opinion. I've been extremely transparent and vulnerable and open from the very beginning. I don't, if I can make a difference in someone's life, if I can walk in that room and make them kind of look at their own, then that's the spirit that I've gone into this with. I think when it comes to drug addiction, we talk about the worst day and we forget the first day. It's like, let's sit our children down and have them watch Unguarded. Let's sit our children down and have them watch, the Todd Moranovich story, and it's like, talk about the beginning with our children. Ask them why. Ask them why they can't function on a Friday night at 15 years old in a basement with 5 kids they've gone to kindergarten with. Like, let's talk about the self-esteem and the self-worth, why you don't have the confidence to, like I say often, like my mom, she died at a young age. If I could pick up my mom today and put her in this car with me, it would be, how come you never asked me why? Like, why didn't you grab me at 17 years old when I was playing in front of 5,000 people at Durfee and be like, you're really good at this, but I need to know why you struggle, after the game in the basement.
Yeah.
And those are the questions that need to be asked. And that's the discussion that parents need to have. And, I know one thing, my speaking, I'm proud of it because the last 2 teams I had in training camp were the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're undefeated. and the next day I had TCU, and they're undefeated. So I got two undefeated teams that I spoke to right before they went into the season.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, just one last thing for you, Chris. Do you still play basketball, and are you still a fan of the NBA? Are you a Celtics fan?
I think I'll always be a Celtics fan. I was born with that. You know, I was born into that. You know, the Kevin McHale's, the Larry Birds, the Danny Ainges, the DJs, the Roberts. You know, that was something I was born into. I will always be a Celtics fan. I'm a people fan. I'm a person, you know, like I root for good people, you know, and if there's good people out there and I know, I root for them. You know, I'll always love the organization of the Celtics. I don't know the players. I don't know. I know Mazzulla, right? I've known him for a long time. He's a phenomenal human being. But I don't know really the players. I root for the players that I know. And, you know, I think, you know, Steph Curry's been phenomenal to my family. I'll always be a Curry fan for how he's extended himself to me and to my children. I'll always be a Kevin Durant fan on how he extended himself. Blake Griffin, you know, Blake Griffin was the first athlete. As soon as Unguarded aired that night, he messaged me for my address, and he sent my children, you know, autographs and sneakers, and him and Jamal Crawford immediately jumped on it. So those are people that, you know, I'll always root for.
Interesting.
Awesome. Honestly, usually I'm really good at signing off on these, but so I'm just going to say thank you for coming on the show. It's definitely a different type of discussion that needs to be had. I'm glad that we could do that here. Thank you for being like so open and unguarded. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, no, listen, it's you know, anytime I get an opportunity, you know, I didn't know what I was walking into, to be quite frank, right? Like Celtics played a very small part of my story, but I will say this, the Celtics gave me a platform. I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't get traded to the Boston Celtics, because the Boston Celtics gave me kind of the notoriety and the relevancy to be out here speaking. So I'll be forever grateful for that trade. It didn't work out the way I wanted it to, and nor could have worked out because of the condition I was in. But I'll forever be grateful that I had that court to play on to give me this platform I have today.
Yeah, great. And I'll next time I see Mark Spears, I'll mention that. That's a great story.
Yeah, Mark Spears. There's people that had unbelievable moments in my life, right? Are we still recording? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Mark Spears, who he changed my life, to be quite honest with you. And I don't hesitate to tell him that. He was part of the launching into this world of public speaking. And, obviously Chris Mullin, obviously Jonathan Hawk, changed the course of my life. I was familiar with journalists because at Fresno State we had Wojo and Andy Katz. Andy Katz were our beat writers. Risha Candidate and Mike Smith were the TV people. So we had some pretty heavy hitters covering us when I was in college. And Mark Spears is a San Jose State guy. He's from that area, so he was well aware of Fresno State. But it's interesting that strangers can change lives. You just never know. You never know the impact you can have, right? That the impression you can make or the gift you can give. And the people I just mentioned have had a profound impact on me. And I, not only on me, but, the Herren Project, we've given away $8 million of scholarships in 10 years. I was on food stamps 14 years ago, and now we give away $8 million to people who deserve care. And that's a huge win for all of us. But without them, I wouldn't be here, and I'm well aware of that.
Yeah. Just to wrap up, Chris, what's the way that people want to find out more about the Chris Herren Project? Where can they go to find out?
Yeah, herrenproject.org. I'm right now, I'm at my wellness center. So I have 36 people living here who are struggling with alcoholism, drug addiction, mental health. Herren Wellness is something I launched 5 years ago. And over the last 5 years, we've had 700 people come through this program. And if anybody out there struggling, Herren Wellness, Herren Project would be an unbelievable resource for them.
Well, thanks a lot, Chris. I really appreciate your time here.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you guys so much.
Enjoy. Make sure you hit that follow, that like, that subscribe, leave comments, do all that good stuff on the show. And then we'll be back with you again next week to discuss even more Celtics basketball.